Okay, it's recording, so when you're done, Jay, just hit that end meeting and you're good to go.
Good morning, everybody. We are doing contracts today. This will be the first time we've done this via computer. So this is kind of interesting, pretty cool. So everybody should have the contract, all of the paperwork necessary to write an offer. You know, like I said, my classes, this is a class that's going to show you how to put money in your pocket, or on the other side of that, to keep money in your pocket, not lose money. You have to come to this class at least twice to be eligible for floor duty. I'm going to suggest that you come to this class 3 or 4 times, because there's a lot of stuff. It's not difficult stuff, but you know, it's a 12-page contract, and then we have 28 addendums that go with it. So there's just a lot of stuff. There's a lot of dots that need to be connected. If anybody has any questions, please, just like in regular class, just go ahead and sign in. Excuse me, I'm sorry, just ask away. You can interrupt me, or you can write a message, and I'll be happy to respond. So the first 2 pages in the packet of the information that I gave you is going to be, one is the MLS printout, and the other one is the same information, but from the Polk County Property Appraiser's website information. So that information will have the information that we need to put in our contract. The first 2 lines of the contract, lines 1 and 2, concern who all is going to be involved in this transaction. So line 1 is the seller, line 2 is the buyer. We are working with the buyer. That's our scenario today. We are working with the buyer, and buyer's pre-approved. They're going to put down 20% down payment and then finance 80%, and they're going to go conventional financing. So we're working with the buyer, so we know the buyer's names, and we want to use the names not by what they go by, but what is on their driver's license. You know, like he may go by Bart, but his real name is Richard. So we want to use what's on his driver's license to put in the names for our buyer. The seller's name we get from the Polk County Property Appraiser's website. In the top left-hand corner, you will see it's the owner of the property, and I would write it just like it is on the website. When you present the offer to the listing agent, you may say, hey, if there's any change in ownership, would you just make the change for me? So the first 2 lines are who all's involved in this. Paragraph 1, we're going to describe the property. We have the street address, the city, and the zip. And then on line number 8, they want to know what county is the property located in. Not what county your office is or what county you're writing it in, but what county is the property in. And then on, excuse me, on the far right-hand side of line 8, you see it says property tax ID number. Now, when you were in real estate school, you were taught to identify property, section, township, range, subdivision, parcel ID. Well, they are asking for the property tax ID number. If you look on your MLS printout, right here in this section, I hope everybody can see that, the top line of that section is the section, township, range. If you go down 2 lines below that, you will see it says tax ID number. The difference between the section, township, range, and the tax ID number is they transpose the section and the range number. So the section, township, range is 26, 28, 23. But the tax ID number is 23, 28, 26. So for our purposes, for this contract, right, on line number 8 on the right-hand side, they want the tax ID number. And then the legal description is right down here in that same paragraph that says land, site, and tax information. So we're describing the property 3 different ways: street address, its tax ID number, and then its legal description. Down on line 15, it says that the following items which are owned by the seller and existing on the property as of the date of the initial offer include, and it says range, ovens, refrigerators, dishwasher, disposal, ceiling fans, intercom, light fixtures, drapery rods, draperies, blinds, window treatments, smoke detectors, garage door openers, security gate, and other access devices, and storm shutters. So there's a couple of things here that we want to make sure that we're all on the same page, because this is an area where we can get into a spitting contest. And what I mean by that is this is an opportunity for misunderstanding. You know, it says on line number 17, range, ovens, refrigerator, dishwasher, all with parentheses and then an S, indicating more than one. My suggestion to you is, rather than relying on that, because you know our job is to not have problems or misunderstandings. So if there's 2 refrigerators on the property, say one in the kitchen and one in the garage, I would write over here refrigerator kitchen, comma, refrigerator garage, and whatever else may be there. Wine cooler, freezer in the garage. You know, there are so many households now that have wall-mounted TVs. You know, is that real estate or is that personal property? We could argue either way, and what we don't want is an argument. We don't want a interpretation. So what I would do, if your buyer wants all of the wall-mounted TVs or just some of them, on line number 20, I would write, you know, wall-mounted TV, family room, wall-mounted TV, master bedroom, wherever it may be. You're better off writing more than less. And if this is a big whoop-de-doo house and you need more space than what is allotted to you on line 20 and 21, just get another piece of paper and make it an addendum and attach it to the contract. If there's any questions, please ask away. I don't see that there are any questions, so I will keep on going here. Paragraph 2 has to do with buying, the money part of this transaction. Line 20, and this is what you need. Let me just tell you the lines that you need to have something in there in a mortgage transaction. So line 26, line 27, line 29, line 32, 33, 34, line 38, and line 41 all have to be filled in. Line 26 is the purchase price, what we're going to offer. So suppose it's listed for $159,900 and we're going to offer $150,000. Well, we're going to write in on line 26, $150,000. Line 27 is the initial deposit to be held in escrow. So how much escrow are we going to ask for? My suggestion is you ask for as much as you possibly can get. In this case, the buyer is going to put down 20% of the purchase price. Using $150,000 as the purchase price, 20% of that is $30,000. So there's the buyer has a bunch of cash. I would ask for a substantial down payment because he's going to have to come to closing with that money anyway. Why not, you know, go ahead and put it in escrow? So I would ask for $5,000 or $10,000. I look at escrow as escrow or earnest money. How earnest, how sincere is our buyer? We want to show good faith to the seller. And one way of doing that is putting down a bunch of money. Also, I call, earnest money anchor money. I want to anchor this buyer to this document. And what I mean by that is, there are certain clauses in this document, in this contract, that allows the buyer to get out of the contract legally and to receive their escrow funds back. That's no problem. I'm talking about anchoring that if somebody has a change of heart, they Uncle Louis said it was not a good thing to do, or they thought about it, they prayed about it, or a black cat walked in front. Whatever it is, it's not legal, and we're only concerned with legal. So if they're going to cancel this contract illegally, then we should make it smart. We should make it hurt, because they're going to lose their escrow money. So I would get as much as you can. Say we get $5,000 in this case. So I would write in on line 27, $5,000. Line 29 is, when does the escrow money get to the title company or the attorneys? I generally, on line 29, X, the second box is to be made, and then it says, if left blank, 3 days after the effective date. I generally will put in 3 days on that line. Keller Williams does not hold escrow. Our escrow agent is Smart Title. We like to do our closings with Smart Title, but if we don't do our closings there, we do want to have them be our escrow agent. So line 32, 33, and 34, all those lines have to do with Smart Title here in Lakeland. Line 38, how much money is our buyer going to borrow from the lender? And says it can be expressed as either a dollar amount or a percent. I like to use a percent. It's just easier. You don't have to change numbers. If our guy is going to borrow 80%, regardless of whatever the negotiated price ends up being. We don't have to change. If we use absolute dollars, we would have to keep on changing the dollar amount. So I like to use percents. On line 38, then, I would write in 80%, 80, and the percent sign. Line 41, the balance to close. So the down payment is made up in 2 parts. You have the initial part A, or the upfront, which is the escrow, and then the remainder of the down payment is the balance. So if we got $5,000 as an escrow, the balance would be 20%, because that's the full down payment, 20% minus the $5,000 that we already have. So I would write 20% minus $5,000 on line number 41. Does anybody have any questions about that? That you need to have all of those lines filled in. I'm just looking at this, and this isn't the first time I'm doing this. Everybody knows what a technological whiz I am. If you're trying to ask me a question and I'm not responding and I don't see that there are any questions, my phone number is 863-602-4781. You can call me and we can try to work something out if you need to. Okay, paragraphs 3 and paragraph 4 has to do with timing. Paragraph 3 is, how long are we going to give the seller to respond to our offer? I like to compress all time periods in real estate. I don't think we need to give anybody a lot of time in making a decision. As far as the seller is concerned, they've been thinking about selling this house for a while. They've probably had to do some work on the house. This is not something that they just woke up yesterday morning and said, oh, let's go ahead and sell this. And when they get an offer, it's something new in their mind. That's not the case at all. Same thing with the buyer. The buyer's been looking online at houses forever. They've gotten their financing straightened out. How do we know that? Because we wouldn't be working with them unless they had a pre-qualification letter. So how much time are we going to give them to respond, the seller, in paragraph 3? I like to go with the day, no more than 2 days. So today is St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. So today's the 17th. On line 45, I would write down tomorrow's date, March 18th, 2020. If I can get this over there at a decent time. What I mean, we're writing this up now, we'll get it over there by noon. That should give them plenty of time. But I don't want to go out more than 2 days. The only time that would be different if you're dealing with a bank-owned property and it says in the comments, seller will respond in 5 to 7 business days. I mean, there's no sense putting down a day or two because the bank is going to work on their schedule, not your schedule. So paragraph 3 is we're going to give them a day, maybe 2 days to respond. The rest of that paragraph says that any counter offers automatically have a 2-day built-in response time. So if we're making countering offers, the party that is countering has 2 days to respond. Paragraph 4, closing date. So contracts are not just about the sales price. Contracts are about price, terms, and conditions. So this has to do with terms, a time period. When do we want to close? Well, it depends on what type of financing we're doing. How long is it going to take for the buyer to be able to get their funds? If they're paying cash, obviously it's quick. If it's conventional, generally conventional takes 30 days. If it's FHA generally takes 45 days. If it is VA, it's 60 days, USDA 90 days. So it all depends on the type of financing, the type of payment that the buyer's doing. So that's one variable, method of payment. The second variable for figuring out a closing date is, so our case, we're going conventional. So what's 30 days out from now? Well, you got to make sure that 30 days out from now, or the closing date the time for acceptance that we put in paragraph 3, 30 days from there, is not a Saturday, Sunday, or national legal holiday. And I'm looking at my calendar, and April 18th, in fact, is a Saturday. So we have to make sure it's not a Saturday, Sunday, or national legal holiday. The third thing is what I call the negotiating fudge factor. How long is this going to take to negotiate? It could take a day, or if this thing ping pongs back and forth, it could go a week. You just never know. So in our case, we said we're going 30 days for conventional, but we looked at the calendar and we see that the 18th is on a Saturday. So we're going to extend that further to the 20th. But we need to build in some days maybe for negotiating time. So I'm going to maybe put down closing date on, and I'm going to write in on line 52 or before. In this case, I would write down like April 23rd, because it's easier to move up a closing date than it is to extend one. Okay, I'm just noticing here on the bottom of every page of this contract, so of all 12 pages, you'll see at the very bottom some boxes. So our buyers need to initial in those little boxes there. Next page. Now, the good news for you is I'm not going to go over every single paragraph of this contract. You're not excused from knowing it, but I'm just going to go over the paragraphs that we have to fill in and what they mean. So we're going to go over to paragraph 7. And this is assignability. This is pretty easy. Line 78 on the very right-hand side, you will always X may not assign this contract. Paragraph 8, Well, we talk about financing again. We get a little bit more specific. On line 86, this says that we are going to do a mortgage for this transaction. So line 86, I'm going to X, and it says this contract is contingent upon buyer obtaining approval of. So we have to declare what kind of loan we're going to get. Excuse me. You know, we're declaring it for our buyer. We're also declaring it for the seller, because the seller may not want to participate in a FHA or VA or a USDA loan. Why? Well, one reason may be timing. We had said that, you know, a USDA loan could take 90 days, VA could take 60, and FHA maybe 45. The seller may want to close right away, so he may not want to get involved in this. So you have to declare what kind of loan our buyer's getting. And then it says we need to get approval within, on line 87, and it says if left blank, then 30 days after the effective date. Well, you know, we had talked about the negotiating fudge factor, and I think it applies to this answer here. You know, if we're going conventional, we said 30 days, but because of timing, you know, the banks are going to be closed on Saturday and Sunday, and we don't know when we're going to be able to get a contract to the bank, how long negotiations are going to take. You know, I may want to put 37 days there rather than 30. If I'm going FHA, I may want to put 42, something like that. Have a little built-in time there. And also, let me just digress here a little bit. So on line 87, it says if left blank, then 30 days after the effective date. The effective date is one of the most important dates on the whole contract. It's so important that if you turn back to page 1, on line 48, it gives the definition of it. And it says the effective date of this contract shall be the date when the last one of the buyer and seller has signed or initialed and delivered this offer or final counter offer. So, excuse me, everything in this contract, all timing issues, begin on the effective date. We also, on line 88, have to declare, again, what kind of loan is it going to be fixed, adjustable, or one of the other? And then on line 89, it says, at an initial interest rate not to exceed a certain percent. And then in parentheses, it says, if left blank, then the prevailing rate based on the buyer's credit worthiness. I don't like to use a specific interest rate because if that interest rate changes, even though the buyer may be able, and changes, I mean, increases, and even though the buyer can still qualify for a higher interest rate, if the buyer wants to, the buyer can get out of the contract legally because he said, I'm only in this transaction for a certain interest rate and not above that. So suppose we write down 3 3/4 interest rate, and the interest rates go up before the buyer locks in to 4 1/4. Well, if the buyer wants to, he can say, no, I'm out because I said I'm only in this for 3 3/4. That verbiage in the parentheses covers any reason that an interest rate may increase. It says that whatever the prevailing rate is, so that means that everybody would have the same rate, just rates have risen because of some circumstance, either globally or nationally, and based on the buyer's credit worthiness. So that's, you have a situation that is universal, and then you have one that is specific to the buyer. And on line 90, it says, for a term of, and it says, if left blank, then 30 days. That's fine. You know, you can write 30 days in there, unless the loan is for 15 years or 20 years, whatever the loan is. How can I find that out? a lot of the pre-qualification letters will tell you how much money they're going to be able to borrow, what kind of loan is it, FHA, conventional, the interest rate, and the length of the loan. So that pre-qualification letter is an important document. Don't see any questions that I see. Okay. Line 91, it says the buyer shall make mortgage loan application for the financing within, and it says if left blank, then 5 days after the effective date. I'm not really wild about that. We had just talked about compressing time periods. We already have a pre-qualification letter, so the buyer's already started this application. I like to put down 1 day, no more than 2 days. You know, I look at this that from a seller's perspective, if a seller gets the offer and he likes the offer and he takes that, if he accepts the offer, then he's going to have to take his house off the market. It moves from active into pending in MLS, and we know that realtors working with buyers only look in the active section. So if the seller accepts this offer, he has to, within a couple of days, take his house off the market. Why then should not the buyer be subject to the same guidelines? So I like to put my buyer in the best possible light. I don't think there's any reason why the buyer should not be able to make an application within a day or 2 days max. You know, everything's done online anyway. Heck, we're doing this class online. You know, so you should be able to work with a lender that is as motivated as you are. If you have a lender that says, I'm sorry, I'm going out of town this weekend, and they don't have anybody covering their business, or if they're not going to respond to your inquiries while they're out of town, then you need to get a lender who's as motivated as you are. Because I know I respond to inquiries when I'm out of town. Okay. Let's continue on to paragraph 9, next page. Paragraph 9 is what are the standard closing costs for the buyer and the seller? Well, they're laid out here. You know, the better you know this contract, the better job you can do for yourself and your client. You really need to know what this contract says so you can protect yourself and your client. For example, I had somebody, a realtor in our office, call me a couple of months ago saying that she was working with the buyer and they were buying a condominium, and she had gotten the closing statement, and the closing statement had a charge to her buyer for a condominium association estoppel fee. Well, if you look on line 128, on the right-hand side, you'll see that one of the seller charges is a condominium association estoppel fee. So this realtor knew this contract well enough to realize that, wait a minute, her buyer was not being served. So, you know, good for her. She called the title company, and the title company moved that charge from her buyer side to the seller side where it belonged. Line 158, that's what I call the pick and pay section of the contract. Generally, we're going to, in this area, it's customary for the seller to pay for the title work and to pick the title agent. So we're working with the buyer that if the seller's going to pay for the title work, we're going to be Xing line 158, that the seller shall designate the closing agent and pay for the owner's policy. Line 173, next page. This is if our buyer wants the seller to pay for a home warranty. If that's the case, what we would do is X where it says on line 173, it says at closing, and we would X seller. Seller shall pay for a home warranty plan issued by, we use American Home Shield, AHS, and I believe the standard policy is $405. So that's what we would write in on that line. The next item is a line 183 or 185. And this has to do with assessments. If the subdivision has current assessments that need to be paid going forward, you would check, does the seller pay for it, or does the seller pay for it up to closing and then the buyer takes over? However that you want to negotiate that with your buyer. If you look at line 217, and this is the energy brochure. It says buyer acknowledges receipt of the Florida Energy Efficiency Rating Information Brochure that is required by section 553 point. So this is something that is, this contract says is required. If you go into your information package, let's see here, towards the rear, about 5 pages from the rear, you will see something that says energy efficiency disclosure. Oops, hopefully you can see that. So your name goes here in the body of the paragraph, and then on the bottom, your client signs and dates it. This is something that is required. The contract says it's required. We keep this disclosure. Okay, this becomes part of our paperwork. And then the next 2 pages is the actual brochure. Your client gets the next 2 pages. In fact, if you want to have them not only sign and initial it, but if you want to have them initial on the contract, you can do that too. All right, next page, paragraph 11. It says property maintenance on the right side. Seller shall maintain the property, including but not limited to lawn, shrubbery, and pool in the condition as of the, here we go, there's that expression, effective date. So how do we know that the seller has in fact kept the property in its condition as the day that it went under contract? Well, if you drop down to line 263, you can see that it gives us the right, because we can do a walkthrough inspection. On line 263, it says on the day prior to closing or on the closing date, the buyer can do a walkthrough inspection on line 265, solely to confirm that all items of personal property are on the property. So that means everything that was here on the first page of our contract: refrigerator, range, dishwasher, disposal, microwave, ceiling fans, all of those things that we are going to be specific about. We're going to write it down. So on line 265, we're going to make sure that personal property still is on the property, and then also to verify that the seller has maintained the property excuse me, as required by the as-is maintenance requirement. So if we go walking into the kitchen, all of a sudden we hear squish, 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 the dishwasher is leaking. We know that that was not the condition when we put the house under contract. We have to get on the phone to the listing agent. Hey, we have an issue here that we need to figure out how to fix before closing. And then the last thing on line 267, the next reason to do a walkthrough is to verify that the seller has met all other contractual obligations. So if there are repairs that needed to be done, agreed upon repairs, we're going to make sure that those repairs have been done, done and then done in a workmanlike manner. You know, when's the best time to do the walkthrough? The contract says on the day before or the day of. You want to have, the closer you can do it to closing time, the better. You know, you want to look at the house naked with nothing there if possible. The only problem with doing it right up before closing is that if there is an issue with something that has to be remedied, then we don't really have any time to do that. So, I'm not going to tell you what is the best or the worst time. It's kind of circumstance, what's good for the buyer and good for the seller. So in other words, the buyer can't just show up at the house and say, hey, we're here to do the walkthrough. You have to have permission, obviously, from the seller, or that would be trespassing. Okay, paragraphs. We're going to move on to paragraph 12. Property inspection and right to inspect. Line 249. So it says the buyer shall have, and it says if left blank, then 15 days after the inspection period. Excuse me, after the effective date. That 15 days is considered the inspection period. I think 15 days is fine to do what you need to do. So the buyer shall have 15 days after the effective date within which to have such inspections of the property performed as buyer shall desire during the inspection period. If buyer determines in buyer's sole discretion that the property is not acceptable to the buyer, then the buyer may terminate this contract by delivering written notice of such election to the seller prior to the expiration of the inspection period. So, there's a couple of things that's said here, and there's a couple of things that's not said. You, as working with the buyer, you want to tell your buyers to have a home inspection. So let's just look at that for a second. After the page 12 of our contract, the next page you should have is something called a disclosure, inspection recommendation, and other information. Up top, you write down the property address, and then the line underneath that, your name goes there. And it talks about, we have a transaction brokerage relationship, talks about affiliated business relationship with Smart Title, talks about the closing cost in Keller Williams Market Center, commission, equal housing, hidden defects, etc. And on the bottom of this page, your buyers need to initial that. On the next page, this is where we're talking about a home inspection. In the middle of it, you'll see there's a bold print, and it says, we will or will not have a home inspection performed. So it's your responsibility to suggest to your buyers that they have a home inspection performed. This is where this comes in. It says, it doesn't say to check it, it says they will initial it. So your buyers need to initial whether they are going to have a home inspection or not. If they're not going to have a home inspection, it's really important that they initial this, saying that they're not going to have it, and then on the bottom, sign and date it. Either way, the buyers need to initial one of the choices in the middle of the page, and then sign and date on the bottom. It also says that they've been given the names of 3 home inspectors. If you only give them 2, cross out 3 and initial where you wrote in 2. But it's paramount that you have your buyers do a home inspection, or at least you suggest that they do a home inspection. While we're here, before we get back to the contract, let's turn the page to the next item, which is a home warranty. American Home Shield. We just talked about that a second ago in paragraph 7. So a home inspection takes place before closing, and generally the home warranty takes place after the closing. Same thing, the property address goes in the top left-hand corner, and on the bottom right, you'll see 2 long rectangular boxes, and right above that, there are 2 squares. And the first square says, I accept the benefits of AHS. And the second square says, I decline the opportunity. The only person who will I accept the benefits is the one who is actually paying for the home warranty. So even if our buyers are asking the seller to pay for a home warranty, when our buyers are filling this out, they would I decline the benefits because they are not paying for it. They are asking the sellers to pay for it. A little kind of counterintuitive, but that's the way it works. So let's get back to paragraph 12. So this says that the buyers can have any inspections done. So hopefully they'll get a licensed home inspector, licensed contractor, licensed termite guy. But do they have to? No. In fact, they could just do a drive-by, inspect it that way. Or they can just cancel it. There's nothing here that says that they have to give proof of why they are canceling the contract. They can just say per paragraph 12 of the contract, I am canceling the contract. They just need to do it with inside of the inspection period. Now, suppose they do a home inspection by a licensed person, and there's some things that the seller is going to be asked to repair or replace. How do we do that? Well, my suggestion would be to get an addendum and make it part of the contract. You have the seller's name, the buyer's name, the property address, and you would only simply have to write buyer request that the seller repair or replace 1, GFI in master bedroom, 2, wood rot in garage door, whatever it may be, I would be very precise, very concise. I wouldn't politic why this needs to be done. I would just ask for it. And I would, your buyers need to sign and date them, need to get it to the listing agent so the listing agent can present it to the sellers ASAP. Now, here's the deal with this. The sellers do not have to respond. If they do not respond by the end of the inspection period, they basically are responding with a no. So suppose we are getting to day 13 or day 14. We haven't heard anything back from the other side, the seller. You may want to consider doing an additional addendum recommending that the inspection period be extended for a certain period of time, because the seller hasn't replied negatively, hasn't said they're not going to do the repairs. Maybe the seller's waiting on getting a quote for one of the repairs. So to keep the transaction alive, you may want to do another addendum extending the time period for the inspection period. Again, if you have not heard back in writing from the seller on the 15th day, the last day of the inspection period, then you need to approach your buyer and say, hey, we have not heard back. If we don't hear back by the end of today, they basically are saying, no, they're not going to do these repairs. Do you want to take the house or do you want to cancel the contract? If they want to take the house, good, you just move forward. If they want to cancel the contract, then you need to do a cancellation of contract and release of escrow form. And it needs to be signed and dated and given to the other side by the end of the 15th day of business. That's very important. All transactions have to be signed and returned to the other side by the end of the inspection period. Okay? Really important. Don't get stuck thinking that you have 15 days to do the inspections. You have 15 days to get everything agreed upon, either negatively or positively. Okay, paragraphs 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Those are kind of the boo-hiss paragraphs. When things go bad, you can read through those. Paragraph 18 basically is title work, and what it says is if there's a problem with the title, if there's a cloud on the title or a title defect, the contract is not automatically terminated. The seller has 30 days in which to correct any title defects. If it takes longer, if the buyer is willing, the buyer and seller can do an addendum extending the closing date. But if there is a problem with the title, it does not mean that the contract is automatically voided. You know, what would a problem with the title be? Well, it could be ownership, the line of ownership. It could be a survey. You know, you may have a utility easement that runs through the middle of a pool, not unheard of actually, that the seller would have to ask for variance from the county or the city. So just because there's a problem with the title does not mean that the contract is voided. We've been talking about 15 days, 30 days, 45, 7 days. The type of days that we are going to use is on line 420. And it says in this contract that calendar days are used. There's another contract that we used to use all the time. We don't use it anymore, where business days are used. But this contract, the FarBar as is calendar days. Paragraph G, Chris touched on this yesterday afternoon. Force majeure. Read through that. This is for an extension, you know, because of acts of God, and this virus is, I would assume, considered acts of God. How that is, automatic extension is built in for the closing of the contract. The next thing we're going to talk about is, let's turn to line 524. Excuse me. 524 is writer's addendum, whether it's handwritten, typed, or pre-printed. What this means is, if we add something to the contract, whatever we add overrides what's already pre-printed in the contract. For example, paragraph 9 talked about the expenses for the buyers and the sellers. Most of the expenses for the buyers, if they're doing a loan, is going to be financing. Suppose we have a buyer who wants the seller to help contribute to the closing costs. We have an addendum for that. We fill that out. So that addendum would override part of paragraph 9. So line 524 says that if we add anything to it, what we add overrides that part of the pre-printed contract. Next page, page 11, paragraph 19 is our addenda paragraph with 28 different addendums. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Most of these that you will ever use are already there for you to use and to just fill out. Paragraph 20 says the buyer shall pay a market center commission of $2.95 to Keller, which is above stated MLS compensation, and that's only paid at closing. The last page is the signature page, where the buyers sign and date, and then the sellers will sign and date after that. And on the bottom, lines 615, 617, that's where you're going to put your name. On the left side, it says Cooperating Sales Associate. So if I was writing this offer on line 615, I would write Jay Reardon. Line 617, I would write Keller Williams Realty Smart. And I would let the listing agent fill in their side. You don't know, maybe they have a special way they want it to be filled out. The next thing that I have is a phishing scam alert disclosure. this is important that you bring to attention to your buyers that if they get a request online to send any type of funds anywhere, that they, one, do not do it, and then the next thing they do after they don't do it is call you immediately and tell you about this. So do not have your people send any funds to anybody without first contacting you. Recently, a person in our market center had a client, a young guy, who sent, it was around $23,000 to a bogus title company. Thank God the bank caught it, stopped it, but he did end up losing, I think, $1,200. So, you know, you figure, oh, this stuff will never happen to me. Well, it does. That is the end of this part of the class. I don't have anything more to add. I don't see that there are any questions. Let me see if I can. If you would, I want to make sure everybody gets credit for attending this. My email is jazz4j, Jas, the number 4, JAY, at AOL.com. Could you please email me and tell me that you were online for this? I just don't know how to see if you were here or not, and part of my ignorance, I will, by the next class, will know how to do this, but I want to make sure that you get credit for this. So anyway, and of course, you know, my office is right in the front door, right before Joan L's desk. If anybody needs to have questions answered, my door is always open for you, so please feel free to come in. I think that's it. Have a good day, sell a bunch, and talk to you later. Bye-bye.